Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. We are here for the 26th and what will undoubtedly be the most awkward episode in this series to date. I don't know what to do with this chapter, so if you find yourself here, if you are still watching this series, help me contextualize the chapter that we just read. We have three sections to this video: a So What Happened section, a Lit Crit section, which is admittedly light, and a writer's circle sort of portion. I'm still struggling with what to call that portion of this series. So, what happened? Our group, our merry band of marauders, is escaping through a really long tunnel that Freed says he knows. It comes out by the trolley house. At the end of the tunnel, just as their lamp runs dry, there is a locked door, and it takes both Iota and Kamet to burst through. And when they do, bats flood in. Because this is a horror writer, I suppose, so we have to have that element thrown in here in the final jaunt towards the exit. Struggling to read my own handwriting here. Charlie finds his backpack. How fortuitous. As Red Molly approaches. Emmett then attacks her to defend Charlie, but is killed like a mosquito. Then Charlie empties the clip on Red Molly before being pretty sure that instead of the gunshots stopping her, Red Molly choked to death on one of her own teeth. So there's that. Charlie realizes he's too slow to outrun the approaching night soldiers, despite the fact that they are 70 to 80 yards away when he turns to face them. So he stops to take them on. As he does so, a cloud of oncoming monarch butterflies starts to kill them. Not sure how that would work when you can set up a bug zapper, a light, like the night soldiers, and watch that light go through hundreds of bugs in a single night. So it is what it is, just because. And Charlie makes a run for and gets out of the city, where all the town folks and all of our previously abandoned supporting characters wait for him. So here's the lit crit portion of this video. In this chapter, do we feel any of the stakes? Do we feel the oncoming danger of our pursuance? Do we feel the loss of one of our supporting characters to Red Molly? Did that have any weight at all attached to it? Do we feel the subsequent victory over them and Charlie rejoining previous characters from this story? And we have to, I think, given the very heroic nature that to which Charlie has ascended, given the sort of superhero type qualities that are being granted to members of the whole, to members of the former royal family. Remember, all those arguments have already been made, have already been standardized in this text, that some people are just, through their blood, better than others. I think we have to see that final scene with the Avengers music in the background, as we are sort of suddenly thrust back into the team sport of herodom. I don't feel any of that. And I don't know why. I don't feel any of the emotions that we are undoubtedly supposed to feel here. And look, I'm not making this as an argument against Stephen King. In, for example, there are moments of absolute dread. In The Shining, there is a pervasive sense of terror. There is a pervasive sense of being pursued that we should have here. So in it's a little bit different because though Pennywise is out for the children, the not titular, but the sort of main characters, the roster of main characters that we have there, it feels as if our characters are constantly falling into his traps, are constantly just sort of, there is no sense of urgency from Pennywise. In, however, The Shining, the sense of urgency is there both from Jack, and we feel that sense of urgency from the Overlook Hotel itself. Here we have that latter sense of urgency coming from the Red Mollys of the world, the Kellens of the world, all of the ruling class inside Impus. We have that sense of urgency. However, it is dichotomized between being told there is that sense of urgency, but there's that Pennywise sense of, well, it'll come to us eventually. See, Pennywise is sort of the interesting thing about him in that story. Once we get to the end of the story, spoilers for it, once we get to the end of that story, we're sort of introduced to the fact that Pennywise, if I can use a classically Christian term, Pennywise is outside the confines of space and time. He is godlike in that story. We have no reason to believe even that our big bad here, though he has the Flight Killer name, is outside the confines of space and time. We have no reason to believe that. But he doesn't seem to have the sense of urgency necessitated by the prince possibly escaping. Neither does Kellen. Even though they are exhibiting that, we have nothing in the writing that makes us, the reader, feel that way. And Stephen King is undoubtedly talented enough a writer to get that across. So I'm not arguing that. Now, that's really all of the lit crit that I have for this chapter. And that is regrettable for me because this chapter, look, here's the positive. This chapter really flew by. This chapter, you sit down to read it and you're turning the pages before you realize it. This has become a page turner versus what it was in the early parts of the book. I do not know that I have ever read a Stephen King that felt this disjointed. Possibly On Writing, but On Writing is written that way sort of by design. The first part is very autobiographical. The last part is very craft-oriented. I think that's the way it was. It might be opposite. The first part craft-oriented, the last part autobiographical. I can't remember precisely. But that is how that book was meant to be. There is Danse Macabre, but Danse Macabre is basically a treatise from Stephen King on the horror genre in general. And it feels very disjointed because the entire time what you're hoping for, at least what I was hoping for, was the in-depth insights of Stephen King into the emotionality of horror, which he gives us a few times. He gives us by going into there's only 4 real types of monster, and he goes into when he talks about, look, you've got horror, you've got revulsion, horror, and terror. I think were the 3 levels of scary stories. I think that's what it was. But he goes through that, but most of the time what he's talking about are TV shows he watched as a kid, or movies that he saw as a teenager. So it's a little bit disjointed from the reader expectation part, I would contend. But all of the other stories that I've read from Stephen King have solid through lines, have solid setups of expectation, and solid follow through, solid conclusions. Is there anyone here who feels as if this story is going to be wrapped up nicely? Is there anyone here still through 26 chapters who believes this story is going to come to a satisfying conclusion? I don't see it. I don't see it happening, especially as we are at the conclusion of this chapter, page 485 of about 585. We've got about 100 pages left, but think of where we came from. Think of where we started this. We have to wrap up the storyline with his father. General expectation would be that there is some type of resolution with the mother character, with losing the mother, because that's the emotional tugging that starts the book in general. We would imagine that we get some types of answers with Bowditch. What was his role in this new world? We would imagine that there would be some type of... The idea of Charlie as the prince came out of nowhere. Maybe we would get some wrap up with that. We imagine that we would get some type of ascendance for the Leah character, at the very least, into the new royalty of the world. We imagine there would be some wrap up with the Kellens and Red Mollys and Flight Killers. How are we going to do all of that? I mean, I must have named 10 things just now. So throw in Christopher Pauli, imagine there are 15 things still floating. I think that's easy to do. We could make that list very simply. If you've got 10 things in 100 pages, you're going at a one answer per 10 page clip. I don't see that happening. I don't see there being nice bows on the package of any of our storylines at this point. So, moving on to the writer's portion, on page 473. I hoped we'd reach the end soon, because the reservoir of fuel in the lantern was almost gone and the light was dimming. Think back to how recently these lanterns were lit and how quickly we got to this, right? We just went on this voyage. We just started this part of the story. We're already running out of the lantern light now. There is much to be said about the passage of time, about the cognitive development of time through writing, how very few pages can feel like a whole lot of time, and how a whole lot of pages could represent a very short time period in the actual story. There are arguments about that, but how many chapters we spent on things so banal as first getting in prison, as the chapters with Bowditch that did not advance this storyline, this being the main thrust of the book, we have to believe. All of that time spent with Bowditch going over, that wasn't even spent threading the plot of this. We just get the moment Bowditch dies, hey, there's some weird stuff going on. I got a gun under my bed and there's some gold pellets and stuff. Because of that portion of the book, the cognitive weight of time in this book is such that, and this is in the writer's portion of this because it is a very tricky thing to pull off as a writer, to make your reader feel a certain way, especially when that certain way is about the cognitive loading of time past. We spent chapters with Bowditch just getting to know him, only for Bowditch to disappear very quickly. That's another thing we never really got wrapped up. What happened with Bowditch? Who are the people who were after Bowditch? So, because so much time was spent on things so banal, here we are, in the heat of the story, the very moments where everything we've put in after 472 pages, everything we've put in could come crashing down because we're out of fuel in these lanterns. And because of that, the entire story could end. But we just got these lanterns, it feels like, because this is the first time the story has gone quickly. So that is just one small note. As for the feeling of time, there are some tricks that writers can use. If you are trying to make something feel like it's taking long, and this is on a sort of paragraph by paragraph basis, not the chapter by chapter novel length thing. It's a little bit more, undoubtedly more difficult over the course of a novel. But if you want to make something feel like it's happening very fast, you're writing action, you need this to be hard hitting and fast, shorter sentences emphasizing the letter S. S makes things fast. Just by reading it. Also, the shorter sentences obviously give you quick pictures of things, as opposed to longer sentences. They say that T, D, 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 B, 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 make things seem longer, as well as M's and N's. That is mainly a trick for poetry, as it is on the microscopic word-by-word level, but it is something that compounds over time. So the stops of the T, B, D, and the elongation of and can really make things drawn out. Finally, again on 473, and this is straight criticism, and it might be criticism based on me being a faulty reader, and it might be criticism based on me being less than impressed with the book so far. We get the quote, "Rats is all. That was Messel." Messel says rats was all. Am I the only one who has absolutely no idea who Messel is? Is that just me? Am I the only one here who has no idea who Messel is? Color me surprised that Messel exists, but here we are on page 473, about to lose the entire kit and caboodle, and Messel is a speaking character. That is all I have for this, the probably most disappointing episode of the series, and for that I apologize. But again, if you were here and you have more context for this chapter than I was able to provide, than I was able to find, to yank out of these words, please let me know. Maybe I'm just off the mark. But that's all I have for this chapter. I hope to have you back for the next one.